the plan this morning is that we're going to look at kind of some material from the 3 chapters you've covered so far, and kind of just give you a little bit more information, kind of bring the information to life, as it were, for you. I'm going to actually take myself off camera now and speak to you basically through the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll have a chance to ask questions at the end, if that's okay. Joining me this morning is Hannah Green, your healthcare tutor with Chevron Training. So Hannah will support me in any questions that we have. Okay, so we're ready to start. Okay, so in this webinar we're going to cover basically material that was covered in 3 chapters. So in developing this PowerPoint, I decided to kind of focus in on areas that I felt maybe that you needed just a little bit more information on. So in the first chapter, we're going to concentrate on elements of legislation and guidance in relation to communication. In chapter 2, then, we're going to look at communication skills in health and social settings. Social care settings, apologies. And in chapter 3, we're going to look at information searching, which basically will take you through getting started, identifying the topic, structuring an assignment, referencing academic writing and presentation of work. So hopefully we'll cover all that I planned to cover this morning. So when we're looking at elements, okay. When we're looking at elements of legislation and guidance in relation to communications, which is the first area that I decided that we should cover. So we're going to look at the, sorry now, the screen is not going forward, the Data Protection Act. So the law that deals with data protection in Ireland is the Data Protection Act 1988, and that was amended in 2003. This basically is the act and the law that covers the information that is gathered in the routine in routine care, say in healthcare organisations, medical notes, etc. Information that might be gathered by government bodies through census forms, etc. Just any information is covered by the Data Protection Act in Ireland, basically. And it's a case that if you give information and personal details, etc., to an organisation or a third party, it is the organisation's responsibility to keep that information secure and safe, and they have to do that, basically. That is the law. So obviously an organisation that gathers data is called a data controller, and data, the protection of data is called data protection. So that's the basis of it. The person that really oversees all this process is called the Data Protection Commissioner, and basically their role is to uphold the function of this Act and also protect the rights of individuals in relation to their data. Basically the Data Protection Commissioner really has a function in kind of looking at finding an amicable resolution if there is a complaint regarding data protection. However, if you or anybody as an individual approaches the Data Protection Commissioner and is not happy with the suggested resolutions, then you can ask him to make a formal decision on whether there was a breach of data or not, data protection law or not, and basically you can then proceed through the courts in relation to kind of getting compensation, etc. So the Commissioner has no role really in regards to compensation or otherwise, but basically they can make a ruling as to whether the law was breached or not. So basically under the data protection law, you have, or an individual has, a right in regard to how their information is used. Basically this law applies if the information is in paper, on a web, in a photographic form, in a video, voice recording, or held on computer systems. And that gives you or anybody else a right basically in regards to the information that is held, that it's actually factually correct, it's used fairly and for the purpose for which it was collected, it is accessible only to those who should have it, and it's stored safely. It's discarded after a time lapse, and a copy can be given to the individual if requested. So that is your rights under this Data Protection Act. You also have a right to object if your details are being used by a data controller and you feel that this is causing you distress or damage. You have to write to the person that has your data, requesting that basically they do not use your information, and they have to reply to you within 40 days. There is no fee for this. However, it does not apply if you have already agreed for them to use your details, if these details are required under a contract, if political parties and for electoral purposes your information can be used, and also if it's required for legal reasons. And if you want more information on the Data Protection and Data Protection Act, you can go to www.dataprotection.ie. There's quite a good bit of information up there for you. So really what I want to do now is for you to stop and think, pause for thought as they say, and I want you to think about what the relevance of the Data Protection Act is to your area of practice. Have you a responsibility in data protection? Is your organisation a data controller? So what information are you collecting and who is it available to? Have you witnessed any breaches in data protection? And I just want to kind of give you a scenario. I am a nurse working on a ward, and I go to the ward opposite my ward to borrow sheets, for example, or whatever, and I happen to pass a ward and I see Mr. Kelly, my neighbour, lying in a bed. And I'm quite nosy and I'd like to know what Mr. Kelly is in the hospital for. So I go to his medical notes and have a read. Am I breaching data protection? So I just want to leave that with you to have a think. So really the synopsis of this is just to think, what are your responsibilities under data protection in your relevant area of practice at the moment? Okay, so I'm going to move on now to clinical healthcare records. And basically these are very important documents in terms of healthcare settings in relation to patients and clients. And these include information such as clinical records, clinical notes, prescriptions, care plans, documentation that will include personal details. And basically the purpose of collecting clinical records is that we need to be able to facilitate patient care and share information with those who are involved in the care. So the idea is that we pass on the information because nobody's going to be in a setting 24/7, 365 days a year. So we have to have information to ensure that there's continuity of patient care and that we know what has occurred for the patient or not. Now documents will vary between organisations and also between healthcare professionals, and there probably will be local guidance available on the management of records within your area of practice. So it's good practice really to know what the guidance is locally in your area. Okay, but no matter what the clinical healthcare record is, there is some basic guidelines which are applicable. Particularly confidentiality. You will probably well be aware of confidentiality now, but I suppose it's no harm to reiterate the importance. All patients' clients' records should be kept confidential. Only those who need to access the information contained in the clinical record should see it. So remember the Data Protection Act, that the person has a right to how their information is used and how it's accessed. And I'll bring you back to the scenario that I gave you of Mr. Kelly. So if I took Mr. Kelly's notes up in a ward where I had no obligation, no caring obligation to that man, and I read through his notes, I'm in breach of data protection because I had no business being in that gentleman's clinical notes. So just remember that when you're in charge, you know what I mean, you have access to patients' notes and that they are confidential documents and you have an onus as a data a data controller to protect them notes, and it is the law. Also, clinical healthcare records should be legible. All written notes should be easy to read. They need to be written in black ink. They also need to be dated, timed using a 24-hour clock, and signed by the professional who writes the entry. That's quite important that that's done. Also, when we look at clinical healthcare records, we should look at abbreviations. We should only use the appropriate and approved abbreviations for our setting. And I'll give you two examples. Clinically, many years ago, we would have used BO for bowel opening. However, if you look at BO in notes, you could misinterpret that as body odour. We would have also many years ago used BM, blood monitoring. However, BM now could be interpreted as a bowel motion. So there can be quite confusion if the abbreviations are not approved, abbreviations within your centre. Also, when you're looking at errors in documentation, it is important that they're corrected properly. You should not use ink or blot out or use correction fluids on entries, because they still need to be visible. So what you do is you score them out with a single line, and you actually initial and then the entry, and then you continue on in the note. Also, when you look at clinical records, the entries should be made as soon as possible after the event, because obviously as time lapses and you're in a very busy care environment, you can forget details, things can become a bit blurred as to the actual facts of the case. And remember, you will have covered the Freedom of Information Act in this module as well, or sorry, in this chapter as well. And under the Freedom of Information Act, as in the Data Protection Act, patients, clients have access to their records. So obviously anything that's written about a patient or a client should be factual. Just briefly to touch on the Freedom of Information Act, that establishes 3 statutory rights for people. It gives a legal right to people to access information held by public bodies or publicly funded bodies or voluntary organisations that are funded mainly in the core by public funds. It also gives you a right to access information about the person, about yourself, and have that information corrected if it's not right, if it's incomplete, or if it's misleading. So obviously, going back to entries into a clinical record, you need to be sure that your information is accurate and factual. The Freedom of Information also gives you a legal right to obtain information regarding decisions that were made that affected the person. So you have some rights under the Freedom of Information Act, but I suppose the difference between the Data Protection and Freedom of Information Act is the Freedom of Information covers public bodies, and there's a fee for applying. So obviously, if you're looking for information in regards to your care or your notes in a private entity, you need to actually access that under the Data Protection Act. Okay, and there is a time limit on how long records are kept. Okay, so that concludes our little session on the first chapter of your communications module. I'm going to move on now and look at communication skills in health and social settings. Okay. So in this module, again, you would have covered the communication process. And basically, you would have covered, I suppose, really understood the communication process of sending and receiving messages between 2 or more individuals. And that is the very simplest explanation, I suppose, of what communication is. However, communication is far more than that, because it includes verbal and non-verbal communication. That includes your body language, your tone of voice, or your paralinguistics, as it's known as, your gestures, your facial expressions, your positioning, and how you appear sometimes, how you stand, your stance, etc. Interpersonal communication then is a process basically where 2 people face-to-face exchange information, and the information is going back and forth, whether the person is speaking or listening. And it's not a process that simply occurs. It involves a kind of a negotiation process, and that can be unconscious or consciously. It's where we give information, but we're also reading signals from the other person as we're repeating this information to them. Okay, so as I said, good communication skills cannot be isolated from other communication skills such as non-verbal listening or clarification skills, because communication skills really enhances the communication between people, and it basically it just reinforces and modifies what is being said in words, and it also kind of can define the relationship between people. It provides feedback to the person that's given the information, and it also regulates the flow of information between people, like in, for example, turn taking, and that's kind of a given really with non-verbal communication. So basically, if you're meeting somebody for the first time, first impressions can last. Okay, and basically the success of a first meeting can actually impact on future communications going forward. You should observe formalities and appropriate greetings, such as introducing yourself, shaking hands, maintaining eye contact with the person, being polite, and smile. A smile means the same thing in every language. You should also speak clearly, keep calm and focused, pay attention to what's being said, be in the moment, and be aware of what's going on around you. Because again, your non-verbal communication can say a lot about your interest in what's actually going on in the room at the time that you're meeting a person. Okay. When you're dealing with clients and patients, you also need to be aware of communication barriers. And because words alone may not be effective in some instances. You might have a language barrier where you may need to use a translator. You might have a person with speech difficulty, and again you may need to use kind of sign language, pictorial aids. Say for example, a stroke patient mightn't have the words, they might need to use pictorial aids, etc. to communicate with you. Again, if the person is blind, they can't necessarily read the non-verbal signs in regards to communication. So you have to, be quite conscious when you're communicating with a blind person or somebody with very poor sight. Again, issues with cognition can affect the communication process. Somebody maybe with dementia, learning difficulties, and also environmental challenges can be an issue in regards to a noisy environment, and if somebody has a hearing difficulty, that can really impede the communication process. And also sometimes it's very difficult to communicate maybe in an open environment where you might need privacy. If you're breaking bad news or you're trying to decipher some personal information on a person, they mightn't want to communicate openly if the environment is quite open and it's a busy environment. Also, when you communicate with patients or clients, you should need to ensure that your speech is quite clear, that you keep your language simple, you keep your sentences short if possible, you use the correct pace of speech, and you back up your words with gestures, etc. So again, it's very important not to use jargon. Jargon is a term we use for kind of medical language that we use in nursing and medicine, that we need to know. We should be aware that patients or clients mightn't understand the terms that we're using. So that's quite important when you deal with communication and patients. You also need to give clients and patients time to respond to you. You need to observe their verbal and non-verbal communication, because that can give you cues to their understanding of what's being said, their interest in what's being said, and whether they're confused or not as to what you're telling them. You also need to listen to what individuals have to say, and you need to ask questions to seek clarity. So you need to kind of reiterate back to them what they have said to you to ensure that you're understanding what they're saying to you as well. Okay. So when you're looking at communication, it's very important to if you're listening, to actually be in the moment. Listening is not just hearing, it's actually paying attention. I'm not sure if you've heard of a little kind of shortened synonym called SOLAR, and that's a good little kind of term to remember communication and listening skills. SOLAR is sit squarely, an open posture, so sit you know, with your posture open, don't have your arms crossed, your legs crossed. Lean forward, but obviously not into the personal, you know, within the intimate space of the person. Maintain eye contact, but not too aggressively. And relax and don't rush. So you're giving a person time to speak to you, because obviously a person might not, sometimes it takes time to actually get a person to open up to you. They might be afraid to tell you stuff, you know, they might have other issues going on in the background, and it might take time to actually get to that information. So you need to give time to the patient when listening to them, and give them time to actually give you the information that you need from them. So when you're communicating with clients, it shouldn't be rushed. And you need to give them time really, you know, to really listen to you. Instead of, you might be potting, cooking the dinner with one ear open. That isn't, you know what I mean, that's listening, but it's not really attentive listening. So you need to be spending time, if you need particular information from a client or patient, to sit down with them and communicate. Okay. So I just want to kind of stop here and have a pause for thought again. And I want you to think, what other communication strategies do we use apart from the verbal and non-verbal communication we use in everyday practice? So I drove down to Wexford today, and on my route I saw road signs. So they're a visual aid to me, to know where I am on the road, what turns I need to take, how many kilometres I am from Wexford town. The likes of health and safety signs are another visual communication tool to us. Diagrams and maps, posters, presentations, and the likes of dance and music and other forms of communication for us. So we don't just use language and non-verbal and non-verbal, we also use other methods of communication. So communication is quite a complex area, but it's an area that we really need to be good at in healthcare. Okay, so that's my little piece on chapter 2 for you. So I'm actually going to move forward now, and we're going to move on to chapter 3 and information searching. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you here on this, so that we can kind of talk through seeking information, etc., and kind of talk you through a little bit of information on your assignments and that. Okay. So basically, before you start anything, you need to really understand what it is you're expected to do in order to gather the information that you actually need. So you have assessment briefs for this module, and they're on your LearnUpon platform. And so to actually know what you need to do, you really need to read through the expectations of the module and what the assessments are. And if you're unsure, you need to check, okay, because you can go down the wrong path quite easily if you don't actually read the brief properly. Okay, so then once you know what it is you need to do, you need to sit down and identify the area that you're going to cover. So that's your topic. Again, if you're looking at a topic, you need to think about, is it relevant to the coursework that you're covering? Is it relevant to your area of practice or your work area? Is it an area of interest to you, or will it support your practice? Because obviously there's, you know what I mean, it's very hard to do an assignment or work on something that really isn't of interest or isn't applicable as such to you. So you need to really kind of sit down and identify your topic quite well before you start. Excuse me, sorry. And I suppose with age and with experience in doing courses, you learn to work smart. So sit down and read your assignment brief over. Read right through it and see if there's areas of work that you can link, so that when you go to retrieve the information, you have information sourced from more than one of your assessment briefs. Okay, so I can't talk, hopefully, I won't forget this, but I'll try and bring that in as I go through this part of the presentation. Okay, so once you have your topic decided, you need to think about the key areas that are relevant to the topic and how you narrow your focus. Okay, so because if you put in your search engine, in Google, communication, you will get a plethora of information. You'll get an amount of information that you need to wade through. Again, we all work, we all have other responsibilities apart from our coursework. So we don't have necessarily the time to be going through reams and reams and reams of irrelevant information. So we need to work smart and narrow your focus and look at what you actually need to find. Then once you know kind of the idea or the areas that you need to actually find, you need to identify where you'll find the information and the types of information you'll use, and then it's how you structure your work after that. So really work smart, think whether you can use the information that you're gathering from one piece of your assignment or your coursework for another. Ensure that you have a topic nailed before you start, and look at the key areas relevant to that. So we'll talk through here now, and we'll look at how you identify your topic and narrow your focus. So if you identify what it is you're expected to do and what your topic is, you then need to consider what information you will look for, okay, and how to structure your work. And this is done by brainstorming and mind mapping. Brainstorming is where you actually sit and think about the topic and you write down everything that you know about it. So it's words that come into your mind when you think of this particular topic, or ideas you have about this topic. Okay, so you just write them down on a piece of paper. Okay, and then in a mind map, you basically take that information that you've done on a piece of paper and link it, put them into bundles, organize them visually in a chart or a diagram. Okay, so I'm going to give you a look here, for example. This is your part of your assignment brief. Sorry. And this is your piece of writing, which is worth 20 marks to you, and it's 1,200 words. So you've been asked to write an assignment on a healthcare topic, and you've been given some suggested topics. So you can look at communication strategies used in healthcare, communication technologies, and how they've influenced communication in healthcare, the importance of communicating effectively with residents, clients, or patients. So you have a synopsis there of what the guidelines you must follow. So it's to be presented formally, word processed, etc. And you can read that for yourself. But I'm going to take the communication strategies used in healthcare as an example to work through here in this presentation. So I have decided that I'm going to look at communication strategies in healthcare. Okay? So I'm going to sit down and write all the ideas that I have down as part of that. I'm going to do a bit of a brainstorm and think about visual, non-visual, non-verbal, listening skills, gestures, and all that information that you will have covered in your module. And I'm going to actually bundle them up. So here I have an idea of a mind map, okay? So in the center we have our communication strategies used in healthcare. And as offshoots then, I have visual communication, I have verbal communication, which I would write maybe on oral or written communication. I have non-verbal communication and listening. Obviously I have 1,200 words to play with, so I'm quite tight on my word count. However, communication is not as simple as that, and an assignment of anything always will have good and bad. It is not just a one-way street. So I'm going to look at barriers to communication, because obviously it's all very well, this communication, visual communication, etc., but there are barriers to communication that we need to be mindful of. So this is my mind map of communication strategies in healthcare. So as you can see, we've covered 4 areas. Okay, so I'm going to write my written piece now. We're 20 marks, 1,200 words. Any formal assignment or written piece should have an introduction. Okay, an introduction basically lets the reader know, lets your marker know what the topic is, and basically it refers to the assignment question. And it should outline how you plan to organize your assignment and what headings you're going to use to use in your assignment, okay? So that basically gives the reader or the marker kind of a signpost as to how you're going to structure your assignment and what it is you're going to cover. Okay, in 1,200 word assignment, approximately 5 to 10% should be for the introduction. So going on the 10% mark, you're talking about approximately 120 words at the most. Okay, so that's quite tight, so you have to be quite cute with your words, as they say. So I'm going to give you an example of how I would structure communications assignments. So I have my heading here, community strategies used in healthcare, and here's my introduction. So I would say maybe communication is an essential skill in life which we are required to survive and relate to each other as human beings. It's a skill we develop from birth which is required throughout our lifespan. Okay, and I have a reference obviously in there. I have said effective communication skills are important in the healthcare setting, and I'm going to say in this assignment the writer will discuss communication strategies in healthcare under the following headings of verbal communication, non-verbal communication and visual communication. And the writer will also discuss barriers to effective communication within the healthcare setting. So if you see there, I basically gave a little run into the assignment as to what communication is. It's essential for life. It's a skill used in healthcare. And then I've said me. I haven't said I because that's not what you use in official or academic writing. I've said the writer will discuss. And I've related this back to the assignment brief, communication strategies used in healthcare, under the headings of. So I've given the reader or the marker basically the headings I'm going to structure my assignment under. Okay, I hope that makes sense, and you can ask me questions on that at the end if you wish. Okay, so we're going to go forward now to the next slide. So working through my mind map example, again, I have now done my introduction, and I suppose just to say some people leave the introduction to last because they find it the hardest piece to do. They might start with their main body, their conclusion, and then go back to their introduction. But whichever way you sit and start your assignment, the main thing is the communication is a run-in. It refers to the topic that you're talking about or you're going to discuss, and it gives headings and how the assignment will be structured. Okay, so now the main body, you're going to discuss the topic at hand. Okay, and you structure that under headings, the headings that you've identified in your mind map and your introduction. Okay, each paragraph should contain one idea or one area. So you shouldn't really kind of, mix up ideas. So if you're looking at verbal communication, you shouldn't be looking at barriers to communication really in the same paragraph. So you need to have a logical flow. Okay. Excuse me. And again, in this assignment, it mightn't be very logical to start with barriers to communication and then discuss the other forms of communication. It's possibly better to look at the communication in terms of verbal, non-verbal, visual, and then the barriers. So as to find a logical sequence for your assignment, so the flow of the assignment actually works. Okay, in a 1200 word assignment, 80% of that main body should, at least 80% should be for the main body of the assignment. And for 1200 words, that means you'll have 960 words approximately to use in your main body. Okay? So now if I'm sitting down to write this assignment, I will have my verbal communication, and I will cover a little bit about oral and written communication. My next paragraph then would be non-verbal communication, and I put my headings in so that for the marker it's neat and it looks well, the presentation looks good, and they know exactly what you're going to discuss. Okay, so my next heading will be non-verbal communication. I might cover body language, gestures, facial expressions, positioning, listening, etc. Again, I'm being very cognizant of the word count because obviously you can't put too much in because you're going to go over your words. Okay, under the next heading I might look at visual communication and the use of visual aids maybe in healthcare. Okay, and then for my last heading in the main part of the assignment I would look at barriers to communication, and I might briefly discuss language barriers, the physical or psychological barriers, systemic barriers such as environment, noise, time constraints, etc. So that wraps up my main body of my assignment, and you can get the idea then where the flow of the assignment comes from. Okay, so relate it back to your mind map, okay, how you sat down and thought about your assignment. Okay, so when you're actually searching for the information, you're searching for verbal communication skills, you're searching for non-verbal communication skills, you're looking at visual communication tools or barriers to communication in healthcare. So you're looking for specifics when you're actually researching your work. Okay? So working through again our mind map example, I'm going to look at my communication modules, piece of writing, and the conclusion and evaluation part of the assignment. Okay? Your conclusion and your evaluation should basically summarize your discussion or your argument and basically analyze your main points. Now, that might be, don't mind the word analyze, but basically what you need to do is sum up what you've said and kind of bring forward the main recommendations that you take from the information. Okay? You do not introduce any new ideas or new references in this area of the assignment. Okay. And just going back to the main body of the assignment, what I didn't say maybe in that PowerPoint slide is that you need to reference the information that you're using, and we'll talk about that just in a few minutes. Okay, so for your conclusion, again, as I said, relating it back to the piece of writing, you have to do with 1,200 words. 5 to 10% should be for the conclusion and evaluation. So going on 10%, 120 words would be what you'd approximately use for your conclusion. Okay? Excuse me. So just as an example, if I was writing this assignment, in my conclusion and evaluation, I might say, in this assignment, the writer has discussed verbal, non-verbal and visual communication while also examining the main barriers and challenges to effective communication in healthcare. And I might go on and just read out just on the main bits of information. I could say, verbal communication in healthcare is important because blah, blah, blah. And then I might say, well, the challenges to verbal communication in healthcare identified within this assignment are. However, overall, communication is a skill for healthcare workers, blah, blah, blah. And you can just kind of round it up nicely in your own words as to what the outcome of your assignment is. Okay, so I hope that kind of makes sense on maybe giving you a structure as to how you work through your work. And I'm going to just kind of go on then to talk about referencing and sourcing of information. Okay, so in academic writing, you basically need to reference the information that you use, okay? You're required to acknowledge information and the references within the assignment text, and also to provide a full reference list at the end of your assignment, okay? And on your Learn-Upon platform, there's the Harvard system for referencing, okay? The information is an information booklet there. I've had a look through it and it's very, very well put together, and it will guide you through the Harvard referencing system. Okay, so it's on your module page for this module, so have a look at it, get familiar with it, because it's a skill that you will need as you progress through your academic career. Okay, if you don't reference the information that you use in your assignment, basically you're committing plagiarism. Plagiarism is a very serious and frowned upon thing in education, and often it will basically, you will fail an assignment based on plagiarism, or you could be excluded from a course based on plagiarism. So you need to get to grips with your referencing and your Harvard system of referencing, because in academic circles that it tends to be the referencing system that is used most often. And basically you need to understand what plagiarism is, because it's very easy to commit plagiarism if you don't become familiar with the referencing system that you're supposed to use. Okay? And I'm going to kind of just talk you through a little bit of that here now. If you put direct quotes in an assignment, sometimes it is very difficult to paraphrase, and I'll explain what paraphrasing is in a few minutes, but sometimes it is very difficult to put information into your own words, and you might have to use a direct quote within an assignment piece or work. You don't use too many of these, you shouldn't, because it breaks up the flow of information and your assignment, and it really isn't good academically to use series of direct quotes. It won't get you marks. But you must, if you do use a direct quote, you must reference it properly. Okay? So in the text of your assignment, it needs to be distinguished from a paraphrased quote by using inverted commas, the author's name and the page number. So I have an example on your screen here now, and it was by Bertino, whose information I've used just in an example previously. So Bertino said basically, communication is an integral part of life. Without it, we would not survive. So, verbal and non-verbal communication begins at birth and ends at death. So that's for Bertino, 2014, and page 8. So you see how I referenced it there. Okay, so it's in inverted commas, it stands out as a direct quote. Okay, and in your reference list at the end of your assignment, this is your reference list which is separate to your in-text referencing, you would have the full text for Bertino. Okay, 2014 and where it came from, and it's all there for you. Okay, so refer to your Harvard referencing system, information booklet on your platform, your Learn-A-Pond platform, as you're referencing your work. Okay, so that is a direct quote. Inverted commas, the author of the work, the year it was published, and the page number. Okay. Paraphrasing is what we do academically when we write assignments. So we search for our information, we get information, and basically we paraphrase that information into our own work to support what we're trying to tell you to say in our assignment, okay? So this is paraphrasing is taking others' work or ideas and putting them into your own words. And you must acknowledge the source of information, otherwise it's plagiarism. So in the text of your assignment, it might read, it is a skill we develop from, communication is a skill we develop from birth, which is required throughout our lifespan. So I put it into my own words what Bertina said, and I've referenced it with Bertina 2014. Okay, so it's a paraphrase quote, there's no page number. Okay, or another example would be of paraphrasing. Bertina 2014 suggests that communication is a skill which we develop from birth and use throughout our life. Okay, so that's how you reference within the text. Okay, now paraphrasing is not changing an A to an I or a, one word, one or two words within the sentence. Okay, so for example, going back to what Bertina said, the direct quote, sorry, now I'll go back here for a second. So paraphrasing, this would not be paraphrasing. If I said, communication is an integral skill of life. Without it, we would not survive. Verbal and non-verbal communication starts at birth and ends at death. So I have changed two words in that sentence. That is not paraphrasing. You will not get away with that in an academic setting. Okay, so paraphrasing is not changing one or two words within the sentence. Okay, it is taking the information and basically putting it into your own words. Okay, and then referencing it. Okay, so it is a skill we developed, and just give me the example there. It is a skill we developed from birth, which is required throughout our lifespan, and you reference it, Bertina 2014. Okay. And again, with a paraphrase quote, you have your in-text reference and also you have your reference list at the end. Okay, so here we go again, Bertina K 2014, and there's your reference list at the end of your work. Okay. So where do we get information then from our assignments? Where will I find the likes of Bertina's work? Well, I might search the internet. I might search internet sites such as Google Scholar, web page information like the HSE and .ie or Department of Health and Children, government documents examples of that. I also need to look through books, maybe visit the library. You online purchase of books that you get from a bookshop, books in your workplace. Many workplaces now have a little library, which is great for information sourcing. you might need to borrow from friends or colleagues who may have done the course before you. There is also information on the LearnUpon platform. I'm just trying to think, what's it under? No, I'm trying to think. But there's supporting information on the LearnUpon platform. I can't think of the tab that you click into just at the moment. I'll try and think of it at the end. Okay, you will also find information on journals, such as online journals, bookshops, libraries, and workplace. Workplaces will often have journals, and also newspapers can be, sources of information for you. Okay. Yeah. So you'll find extra resources for communication in healthcare, etc., within the LearnUpon platform. So have a nosy around, play around, you'll find information there on that platform, but also you need to research outside the course material, because obviously the course material is the information you're given, but you need to build upon it, okay, to actually complete the course and complete your assignments. Okay, so when we look at information, we're looking at types of information. So when we talk about primary sources, we're talking about research studies, surveys, information that comes directly from the researcher or the person that's publishing. These are considered more credible than secondary sources. So for example, if I went to the Central Statistics Office figures, that's a primary resource. Okay. Secondary resources then, or sources, would be information that's already available and produced. So there might be articles, opinion pieces, books, information on the internet that, you know what I mean, is kind of out there in the general public domain. However, wherever you get them, you need to reference them. Also, you need to critique the information. Basically, if you look on, if you put into Google, Wikipedia. You get a Wikipedia page for anything you want, but how credible that information is very, dubious to say the least, because anybody can develop a Wikipedia page. Okay, so you need to look at the information as it is and critique it. And when we talk about critical thinking, we basically are talking about looking at information, reading the information, absorbing the information, and basically deciding what the information is and whether it's credible, whether it's relevant, whether it's not relevant. Is it right? Do you agree with it? Don't you agree with it? What does it mean for the patient, for the, for the person? What does it mean in healthcare? So it's kind of pulling the information apart, looking at it and seeing, is it relevant, isn't it relevant, is it good, is it bad? And what it means basically in overall terms. Okay, so we've kind of spoke about that now. So when you look at you're finding your information, you would have in your module covered scanning, skimming, reading, active reading. What I would say to you when you look and you're looking for information for assignments is don't get lost. And this is a habit I'm in. I might find something that is of interest to me, but isn't really relevant to the course. So I might spend a half an hour reading something because I like it or it's interesting and I find it, it might be relevant somewhere else. But actually, I'm kind of gone off my coursework. And now, that hour I had to actually sit down and do the assignment is gone. And I'm under pressure to get the work finished. So be quite disciplined with yourself when you're reading. Use the skills there that you were that basically was given to you on the third module there on scanning, skimming, and reading. Because they're good tools to have when you're actually trying to decipher through the information for your assignments. Okay, we're going to move on then to academic writing and presentation of work. Okay, so when we look at academic writing, so I'm trying to find information here, I've lost information. Anyway, when we're looking at academic writing, what do we mean? Basically, academic writing is a very formal and structured way of writing. It's what we expect and it's the standard we expect in education. Okay, we use correct grammar and punctuation. We don't write in the first person, and I referred to this earlier. You don't say, well, I think, I suggest, in this assignment I am going to write. You do not do that unless you're specifically told to write like that. And the only time really that you'll ever be told to write in the first person is if you're doing reflection or a reflective piece. Okay? So in this assignment, and in most assignments, you're expected to speak kind of as a third person, say the writer suggests, the author suggests. I today would suggest to you to use the writer. Because if you're looking at research or information, there might be times where you need to quote, well actually this author said. So it can get confusing if you're calling yourself the author and you're referring to other academic work, you know, in the person of the author. Okay, so the writer suggest might be the best way of proceeding with it. Also avoid everyday slang. You know, if I met you, say, in the park or whatever, I might say, your man, the health minister said, you know, I might, you know, very, very ordinary, everyday kind of way of speaking and you know, the slang that we use in our everyday talk. However, when you're writing academically, that isn't the way we write. We have to keep it very formal, so we might say, Mr. Varadkar stated that, and you know what I mean, and then you put in your quote and your reference. Okay? So you have to use kind of formal language. Okay? So also avoid shortening words, such as I couldn't, I wouldn't, it's not. You would say could not, would not, it is not. Okay? Avoid everyday catchphrases or casual words such as, you know, statements we kind of bring into everyday life. So, you know, Murphy's Law. Oh, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't. You know, so I'm hoping you're getting the meaning there, but basically that you don't use kind of casual phrases or terms of word basically in your assignment. Okay. So again, what we suggest to you is that you look at your presentation of work, because again you lose marks on this, and this is for any educational course or academic piece of work. You will lose marks if your presentation isn't good. So you need to develop a draft, you need to edit and proofread your work. And chapter 3 of the course on Learn Upon platform, page 14 and 15, gives you very good information on this. Your work should be word processed, typed in 12 plain font, and I think it's Times Roman numeral is what's suggested, 1.5 line spacing, and it should be formatted properly. You basically need to submit a draft. Oh no, you submit your work as per your assignment brief. You need to put your top copy on. Sorry, you need to ensure that you have your brief on, and that all your pages are numbered and your name is on them. And basically you need to ensure that you have a copy of your work that you submit. So a good advice to you is save as you go, because oftentimes computers will crash and the information will be lost and you'll end up starting again. So save your work as you go or email it to yourself. Very good advice. I've done it 100 times and the stress it will cause you will be phenomenal. Save your work as you go. We can't tell you that often enough. Okay. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else I need to cover now? Okay, ensure your assignment cover sheet, this is what I was trying to get at earlier, is submitted and that your authorship statement is completed before submitting your work. Okay. So just to recap, we kind of looked at the material that was covered in your communications module. We looked at chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. We looked at elements of legislation and guidance in relation to communications. We looked at communication skills in healthcare and social settings. We looked at information searching, getting started, identifying your topic, structuring your assignment or piece of work, referencing of source information, academic writing, and your presentation of work. Okay, so hopefully that was an informative presentation for you and that you each got something out of it. Thank you for your time.